Hello friends, Jeff here with House of Heresy. I'm back again with another Commander/EDH deck tech video. So in these videos kind of go through one of my Commander decks. I've broken apart talking about the different parts and pieces that kind of help it come together, the themes behind it and all that stuff. And then, yeah, just talk about it. So, as always, I am by no means an expert. I play for fun, do all this for fun, so it's not like I'm getting any sort of crazy monetary incentive or anything like that to make these videos, but they're definitely enjoyable. So the reason why I'm saying that is because I am by no means an expert. So if I miss something or if I'm saying something incorrectly, please throw it down there in the comments, because it's always good to learn. And I have been playing Magic for most of its existence. I started in around the 95-ish era there, like Ice Age homelands. However, I've had many, many long and large gaps in between my different times of playing over the course of my life. So I am very much unaware of many, many cards that are out there. So if you see any or know any that that I'm missing when it comes to these decks, throw them in there. I'd love to hear the comments or hear the suggestions, and then I definitely go check it out. And if it's something that I can use or it's easy for me to get a hold of, then I will throw it into my deck. So been really appreciative of all the people who have taken the time to comment on our past videos in this series, because it definitely is nice for me to see, so I can kind of continue to grow as a player. Yeah. All right, so let's get into it. So this is one of my monocolor decks. I think at this point we have seen all of them that I've made so far. I still intend to make a mono red deck. I just haven't done it yet. So the commander for this one is going to be Muriel, Shield of Argive. And this is one of the pretty good and fairly expensive cards that came out of the Brothers War. So this is a pretty recent deck that I built. So Muriel is... she costs a white and 3 generic. She's a 3/4 human soldier, and her abilities are: during your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. And whenever Muriel attacks, create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. So she wants soldiers. This is a soldier tribal deck. And she also does a great job of protecting you and your board state in your turn. So it has been that has been a very powerful ability from what I've seen in my games. Sometimes my opponents will forget that that's a thing, and they'll miss their opportunity to cast stuff going into my turn. Other times they would love to interact or react to what I'm doing, but they can't, and they have to wait till the next player's turn to have a shot at it, or their own. She really, she's a lot of fun. She's very strong. I will say that right now. This deck is not fully optimized. I pretty much built it with what I had available to me, so I'm certainly missing lots of probably crucial soldier tribal cards, and I would love to hear what they are, because, I mean, I can go on and read EDH Rec all day long, but I'd love to hear what people's experiences are. Yeah, so she wants lots of soldiers on the board. She wants to make more soldiers and really just build an enormous board state that hopefully swings in and kills your opponents. And I have very much put people on like a 1-turn clock with her. Like it is not hard to create a board state out of nowhere with her, and she reasonably protects it, at least during your turn. So that's Muriel. That's our commander. So let's talk about the first stack here, and that is primarily soldiers. So we have lots of soldiers in this deck, which I'm sure is a surprise to nobody. This is one that came out of Dominaria United, the Valiant Veteran. It's one white and 1 generic for a 2/2, and it's a lord, so other soldiers you control get +1/+1. And then you can pay 2 white and 3 generic to exile the Valiant Veteran from your graveyard to put a 1/1 counter on each soldier you control. So even when he's dying, you still give him back, which I really haven't used the second ability that much. I haven't had the opportunity to. But just being able to pump up your soldiers is pretty nice, because Muriel will very quickly build a board state where there wasn't one before. So pretty strong card, especially for only 2 mana. The Adaptive Automaton here got a reprint in the Brothers War. So this is one of the schematic artifact cards that was part of those part of that cycle. So as it ETBs, you choose a creature type, which in this case would be soldier, and then it is that in addition to its other types and other creatures you control of the chosen type soldier get +1/+1. So it's a 3-mana 2/2 lord for whatever creature type you so choose, but in this case 100% soldiers. Rescue Retriever, here's another one out of the Brothers War. I think this was out of either the Jumpstart or it was only available in like certain spots. I don't think this was in the actual main set. But it is 2 white and 3 generic for a 3/3 dog soldier with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on each other soldier you control. So you're pumping them all up. And it's got the static ability, prevent all damage that would be dealt to other attacking soldiers you control. So it doesn't affect him, but all your other soldiers have that combat damage prevented while he's on the board. And since you can flash him in, that's pretty strong too. Especially since your opponents can't interact with him if you flash him in on your attack step, because assuming Muriel's on the board, because she shuts down their ability to cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So this is a pretty strong card. 5 is a little on the high side, but you do get a 3/3, and the 2 abilities are really strong, not to mention being able to flash. You got the Gold Knight Commander. It's another soldier, white and 3 generic for a 2/2 human cleric soldier. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. So this gets really large when Muriel's going off, especially if you already have a bit of a board state and she turns sideways. Suddenly she's generating however many soldiers, and each of those soldiers will trigger. So you have to do them basically individually, because the first soldier that comes in on her trigger will give all your existing creatures +1/+1. And then so on down the line. So it really gets pretty large, which is quite nice. And then you got Keeper of the Accord. This is one of those classic ones that came out of Commander Legends, the original. So for a white and 3 generic, you got a 3/4 human soldier. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. And then at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than you may search your library for a basic Plains card, put that onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. White has gotten a lot better since really starting, well, I shouldn't say starting, but from Commander Legends time onward, it has gotten a lot of tools to help it ramp, way more so than it had previously. So this is one of the, from my perspective, because I kind of started playing again in Commander Legends, this is where I kind of noted that White was starting to get some cool tools, and this was one of them. But in addition to the ramp, which is really important, you also get to generate hopefully soldier creature tokens on your opponent's end steps, assuming that they have more than you do. This is a great one for if you're going later in the turn order. You ideally want to be going after your opponents so that he ramps up pretty good. Then you got the Banalish Commander, who is also a white and 3 generic for star. It's a human soldier, and his power and toughness are equal to the number of soldiers you control. So he really enjoys it when Muriel goes off and generates a bunch. You can also suspend him for 2 white and X, with X being whatever you choose as long as it's not 0. So at a minimum 3 mana. And whenever a time counter is removed from him, while he's exiled, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So also helping with the board state, we like that. This deck is not a true, its true focus is not token generation, but we rely on it heavily. There's definitely sub builds or other builds of Muriel that really go all in on the token generation, and we do to a degree, but that's not like the primary focus. We focus more on the soldier synergies that just happen to be creature tokens, which is pretty nice, but there are other ways to build this deck. Then you got another Brothers War card. Siege Veteran is white and 2 generic for a 2/2 human soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target soldier you control. And then whenever another non-token soldier you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So you're kind of helping to minimize the loss of a board state to a degree. You obviously don't want to have all your non-token soldiers go away, because most of them are pretty offer other other abilities besides just being soldiers, but it's nice to be able to do a 1-for-1 swap if you do end up losing some of them. You got Resolute Reinforcements, which is out of Dominaria United. For a white and 1 generic, you get a 1/1 human soldier with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So basically 2 mana for 2 1/1s. But the soldiers, as we've seen already so far and will continue to see, really benefit from having more of them. So it's a nice little way to put a couple extra bodies on the board for relatively cheap. You got Prava of the Steel Legion for 2 generic and a white. You got a 1/4 cat soldier. As long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+4, which is pretty good because we're going to be creating some tokens. And then you can also pay a white and 3 generic to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Haven't really done that part of it because that's kind of expensive for a 1/1. But if you really got nothing else to sink your mana into, or I guess if, I don't know, as like a defensive strategy, you could potentially pop one in before you declare blockers or something like that. But just generally, just getting +1/+4 to your creature tokens on your turn is really strong, especially since Muriel really almost completely stops your opponent's abilities to interact with your board. And you got Mentor of the Meek. This got a couple reprints recently. This version's out of Jumpstart, the original one, and then this also appeared in Double Message 22. It's a white and 2 generic human soldier, 2/2. Whenever another creature power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay 1 generic if you do draw a card. So this is a great way to get some card draw, especially if you have a bunch of mana up going into your attack step, and Muriel generates a bunch of tokens. You could potentially draw quite a few cards here. So pretty strong, and it doesn't cost a lot. Guardian of New Benelia, which is our playmat for this video. So it's a white and 1 generic for a 2/2 human soldier. It's got enlist. And whenever Guardian of New Benelia enlists a creature, you scry 2, and then you can discard a card to make her indestructible until end of turn, but you have to tap her. So it's another nice little synergistic soldier card there. Got the Sun Gold Sentinel, who is 1 white and 1 generic for a 3/2 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And then if you have Coven, which is 3 or more creatures with different powers, you can pay the white and 1 generic to choose a color, and it gains hexproof from that color till end of turn, and can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So pretty nice. I mean, 2 mana for a 3/2 alone with the correct tribal, really solid. We like that. But having all the extra abilities is quite nice too. You got the Crusader of Audric for a white and 2 generic, a human soldier with ***, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. So this one doesn't care as much about the soldiers, although it is a soldier, but it's still, you will generally have a fairly wide board state, so this helps you go big on a creature in addition to going wide, which is pretty nice. Selfless Squire is 3 generic and a white for a 1/1 human soldier with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn. And whenever damage that would be dealt to you is prevented, put that many 1/1 counters on Selfless Squire. So if somebody's swinging for the fences at your face, this is a great way to absorb all that, prevent it, and make a really big creature in response. So pretty nice. Cathar Commando is another one of our nice little soldiers here. White and 1 generic for a human 3/1 soldier with flash. You can flash it in, and then you can pay 1 generic to sacrifice it and destroy target artifact or enchantment, which is pretty nice. We like to have that flexibility. I mean, 3 mana to flash it in, not the end of the world. There are cheaper ways to get the same effect, but having it on a soldier is also nice too, because you could potentially just play her, just have her sitting on the board, and then if you need to, sacrifice and destroy in response to something. Of course, Esper Sentinel. A lot of people don't remember this, but she is both a human and a soldier in addition to being an artifact creature. So a great card, one of the top cards to come out of Modern Horizons 2 that was original to that set. So it's a 1/1, and whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Everyone's pretty familiar with this card. This is a soldier tribal deck, and Esper Sentinel is a soldier, so that's really all we need to say. Definitely worth putting in here. Bounty Agent is a white and 1 generic for a human soldier that's a 2/2 with vigilance, and you can tap to sack and destroy target legendary permanent that's an artifact, creature, or enchantment. This could be a little situational, but however, in Commander, most commanders would be susceptible to this, so the targeting's kind of nice, and it's nice to be able to interact with artifacts and enchantments. White's a little bit better at that than some other colors, but there's a lot of really strong enchantments in the format. Obviously, that's been the case for a lot of Magic's history, but we've been seeing a lot more added in the last few years. That's one of the stronger card types that we don't necessarily have a ton of interaction with for most decks. So this is just a nice way to put it in there on a soldier, which again is what we want. We got Savior of Ullenbach for 2 white and 1 generic. You got a 1/2 human soldier with training. And whenever the Savior trains, you can exile up to 1 target creature from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. And then when it leaves the battlefield, you can put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their owner's control. So this could be defensive. You could do this to exile one of your opponent's creatures to swing through or whatever. Or it's a great way to get a creature back from your graveyard. And so you train, you use it to target a creature card from your graveyard, and then when the Savior goes away at some point, whether by your choice or your opponents take care of it, then that exiled creature comes back, which is pretty nice. Tithe Taker, this is one, it's a good card. I like it. It's a little redundant because Muriel kind of shuts off any value you get from it. But for a white and 1 generic, you get a 2/1 human soldier. During your turn, spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast, and abilities your opponents activate cost 1 more to activate, unless they're mana abilities, and it's got Afterlife 1. The reason why I say it's kind of redundant or not super useful is because Muriel already just shuts everything down anyways. So this is more going out before Muriel, or I guess in case Muriel gets targeted, but realistically, you're not going to get as much value out of this card as you would in other decks because of Muriel's ability. And you generally want to prioritize having your commander out in this deck than some other decks. But still, it's a good card, and it definitely, when it is affecting your opponents, it's great. You got Faithbound Judge, who's 2 white and 1 generic for a 4/4 Spirit Soldier with Defender, Flying, and Vigilance. At the beginning of your upkeep, if it has 2 or fewer judgment counters, you put 1 on there, and then as long as it has 3 or more judgment counters on it, can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So you got a 4/4 Flying Vigilance initially with Defender, and then you can eventually work your way out of it. And then it's also got Disturb, so you can, if it's in the graveyard, you can cast it for its Disturb cost. And it is Sinner's Judgment, so you enchant a player, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put a judgment counter on Sinner's Judgment. Then if there are 3 or more judgment counters on it, enchanted player loses the game. If it would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. I've yet to do that. It hasn't really come up, but that is definitely a way to put a player on the clock and probably make you a target, at least by them. If there's group consensus with the rest of the table that they want to see that player go away, then you might get some support, but it could be a little bit dangerous. But it's nice to have the option. And a 4/4 flyer is pretty good for this deck because we don't have a ton of ways to interact with flying or create flyers. Then we got Cemetery Protector, which is 2 white and 2 generic for a 3/4 human soldier with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a card from a graveyard, and whenever you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a card type with that exiled card, you create a 1/1 white human creature token. So this is a token generator. It's a little bit limiting. You have to kind of choose correctly. You could conceivably play this where there's not a good choice in the graveyard, then you're kind of hosed. But ideally, you would want to pick probably a creature because this deck is a little bit heavier in creatures. Maybe lands. I guess land could work too because we obviously want to play lands, although in my monocolored decks, I tend to go a little bit lighter on the lands than in my multicolored decks, so there aren't as many in here. Then we get Defiler of Faith. This is part of the Defiler series, obviously, out of the Dominaria United set. So for 3 generic and 2 white, you get a 5/5 with Vigilance. It's a Phyrexian human, so this is not a soldier. However, it does let you essentially use 1 or use one of the white mana to in a casting cost as Phyrexian mana, essentially. So you could still pay the 1 white, or you could pay 2 life, but you can only do one of those for any card. So if you were, this isn't a good example, obviously, because the card would have to be on the battlefield, but assuming that this was a separate card and Defiler of Faith was on the battlefield, you could pay 2 white and 3 generic for this card, or you could pay 1 white, 3 generic, and 2 life for this card. But it's the other ability that we actually care more about, besides having a 5/5 with Vigilance, which is pretty good too. And that is, whenever you cast a white permanent spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. And we have lots of white permanent spells because we have lots of creatures in this deck. Creatures, enchantments, and some artifacts. So it's actually a pretty strong card for this deck, even though it's more for the Phyrexian. It's a little off theme from what Muriel's doing normally, but still quite strong. And then you got Lena, Selfless Champion, who is 2 white and 4 generic for a 3/3 human knight, also not a soldier. However, when she enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token for each non-token creature you control. So if you have a bunch of your non-token creatures out, she dumps a bunch more tokens on the board. And then you can sack her, and creatures you control with power less than her power gain indestructible until end of turn. So it's a nice way to protect the board if you need it. She is 6 mana, so it's a little situational. She definitely prefers to come in later in the game when you have a decent-sized board state of specifically of non-token creatures, because then you can really get the most out of her. But still pretty good for this deck. And then you got the Evangel of Heliod for 2 white and 4 generic. You get a 1/3 human cleric, again not a soldier. However, when it enters the battlefield, you create a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. And we have lots of white permanents, as we've talked about, so this will ideally generate a bunch of soldiers for you. And finally in this stack, you have the Platoon Dispenser, which is another mythic out of the Brothers' War. So it is a 5 generic cost artifact creature construct that is a 4/6. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, you draw a card. Ideally, we want to have 2 or more other creatures. So 3 total, 2 in addition to the Platoon Dispenser. And then you can pay 3 generic and a white to create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So again, that's a little pricey. If you don't have the mana to spend on it, or if you have extra mana to spend on it, then it's a good way to go. And then you can also unearth it for 2 white and 2 generic. Okay, so that's it for kind of like primarily focusing on the soldier, either soldiers, non-token soldiers, or cards that really help us with the soldiers, creature cards that really help us with the soldiers. Next stack is going to be kind of also playing off on that, but from some of the other card types, not really creatures specifically. So first one, you got Raise the Alarm, which is a white and a generic instant that lets you create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, which is pretty good. Then you got Call the Coppercoats, which is a white and 2 generic. It costs 1 generic and 1 white more to cast for each target beyond the first. And then you can choose any number of target opponents to create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures those opponents control. So if you wanted to target 2 of your opponents, this would cost 2 white and 3 generic. And then you would create you would create a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens based on the amount of creatures those two players had in total. So this could be very targeted, or if you had the mana for it, you could target the entire board and potentially generate a huge board state. It's also instant speed, which is pretty nice. So you could hold this up if you're maybe like holding, say, a Teferi's Protection or something like that in your hand, just waiting to go, and then nothing happens. You could always play this on your opponent's to the right's end step to generate a bunch of these going into your turn or something like that. So it's a lot of good utility for it, and it's at a minimum, 3 mana to generate however many creature tokens you generate is a pretty good deal. You got Captain's Call, which came out of Dominaria United. This is a white and 3 generic, and you create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. So again, 4 mana for 3 tokens isn't too bad, especially with how much we like having lots of soldier bodies on the board. Then you get into some of the more traditional token payoffs. So Anointed Procession, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this card. Very strong, and it's actually kind of expensive right now. It is white and 3 generic for an enchantment, and if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. So if Muriel is attacking and you have four soldiers on the board when she taps to attack, instead of generating 4 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, you would be generating 8, or any of the other token generations that we have. So like Call of the Coppercoats would be generating double the amount that it was originally doing. So this is a very strong card. Like I said, it's a little pricey, so I could understand why you may or may not want to put it in here, but for the amount of tokens that we do generate, it's pretty solid. Divine Visitation is another one of those classic ones. So for 3 generic and 2 white, it's another enchantment. And if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. This one, at face value, could seem a little questionable because you really want the soldiers to kind of continue to multiply your board state. However, once you get above, I don't know, say like between 4 and 6 soldiers, if Muriel is creating 4 to 6 4/4 angels every turn, who cares if we're not like going that much wider? Like those 4/4 angels are probably going to have more impact than twice that number of 1/1 soldiers in a lot of cases. But this is a little situational, so I could definitely understand why you wouldn't want to put it in here because it's not really fully playing with your actual soldier tribal theme. But the payoffs are pretty high, and when I do play this with my friends, it tends to get me targeted or my board state targeted pretty quickly because nobody likes to see all those angels coming out. So quite strong, but it can be a little situational. I can understand why people wouldn't want it in there. And you got Takacia's Welcome, which is a card from Brothers War. It's white and 2 generic for an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Ideally, Myrel's swinging every turn she's on the board, so you should be getting an extra card draw every turn, hopefully. There are ways to generate creatures, as we've seen with, like, say, the Platoon Dispenser or some of the other cards on other people's turns. So you could potentially get card draw throughout the turn cycle before it comes back to you if you have the mana for it. It seems like it's a pretty good card in general because we are creating a lot of creatures that are mana value 3 or less. And then we got Intangible Virtue, another enchantment for 1 generic and 1 white. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance, which is quite good for us because it's not specific to soldiers if we create those angels, but it's giving what will probably be the majority of our board state a nice buff there, but with the extra power and toughness and the vigilance. And for 2 mana, it's really hard not to put in here. And you got Marshal's Anthem, which is 2 white and 2 generic for another enchantment. It does have multi-kicker, 1 and a white. So creatures you can control get +1/+1. Then when it enters the battlefield, you can return up to X target creatures cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times it was kicked. So if it's later in the game and you have a bunch of creatures in the graveyard, you could potentially create a pretty good sized board state. At a minimum, 4 mana for giving all your creatures 1/1. It's decent, especially with how big our board state gets. This gets significantly better the longer Muriel is on the board and tapped and attacking each turn, because you're getting more and more value out of it. But it is a little expensive, so earlier in the game might not be quite as useful. Inspiring Leader, this is one of the backgrounds out of Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. So this is a white and 2 generic, again for background enchantment. Commander creatures you own have creature tokens you control get +2/+2. So as long as this is on the board and Myrel is on the board, Myrel is giving all your creature tokens +2/+2 because she inherits the ability that does that. So pretty strong. 3 mana to do that is really, I think is worth it because she is most likely generating at least 1 soldier token because she herself is a soldier. Each turn, and that means you get at least 1 3/3, and the longer she sticks, the more 3/3s you're generating. So it's pretty good. Legion Loyalty, this one is bonkers. It is 8 mana, 2 white and 6 generic, and I can understand where in faster paced games this is probably not really super optimal, but giving Muriel Myriad is ridiculous. You generate so much value off of this, and really all your creatures in general. Just a really strong card. I highly recommend it. I don't think it's stupid expensive. It is one of the mythics out of Baldur's Gate that has a little bit more value than some of them, especially a lot of their creatures, but I don't think it's like stupidly expensive, but it is a really strong card. Highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun to play with. Gets everyone rolling their eyes and worried about you. Horn of Valhalla. This is one of the adventure cards. So for a white and a 1 generic, it's an equipment that equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. So if you slap this on Muriel, she'll get pretty big pretty quick with the amount of tokens she's generating, but really you could attach it to anybody. Or you can do the adventure side first and pay 2 white and X to create X/1/1 white soldier creature token. So it's another great token generator. But the equipment payoff is pretty strong in this deck. Coat of Arms, the infamous Coat of Arms. I almost didn't put it in the deck because it really can be painful to resolve as everybody's doing everything, because you have to, every time it matters, you have to stop and take a census of the deck, or sorry, of the battlefield to determine who gets what. But it is 5 generic for an artifact, and each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least 1 creature type with it. So for most of our deck, everybody's going to be getting a lot because almost all of them are going to share the creature type soldier. So this one takes a lot of math. There are definitely less mental gymnastics required for a lot of the other tribal artifacts. I just happen to have those in my other decks, and I built this one later, and I kept this one out because it was painful. But it's in here, and you know what? If it matters, we work it out. If it doesn't, I like some of the people I play with, like they want to stop and kind of wrap their minds around what the current board state is, and I'll usually tell them, don't even think about it until it comes up, because it is not worth redoing the mental math there every single time the board state changes, unless it matters. Then you got the Halo Fountain. This one came out of Streets of New Capenna. For a white and 2 generic, you get an artifact with a bunch of tap abilities. So you can pay 1 to tap it and untap a tap target creature you control and create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. It'd be nice if it was a soldier token, but you know, beggars can't be choosers here. You can pay 2 white and tap it to untap 2 tap creatures you control and draw a card. Or you can pay 5 white to tap it and untap 15 tapped creatures you control and you win the game. This is great with Muriel because, in case you forgot, your opponents probably can't interact with you playing this on your second main phase. So if you swing in with 15-ish creatures, 15 or more, that then become tapped, and you play this, you can then untap those 15 creatures and win the game, and it's unlikely that your opponents are going to be able to do much about it. So nice little alternate win con. It's kind of a fun card. I don't know how much play it actually sees outside of this kind of a deck. I haven't seen anyone else use it, but it's entertaining, and I don't think it's that expensive, so I would recommend it. Any deck that has white and is doing lots and wants to go wide, this is kind of a fun alternate win con. And then we got a couple of Planeswalkers who assist us with our soldiers. So this is Elspeth Sun's Champion, and I apologize for the format. It looks really cool, it's fun, but actually reading it, it's different enough from normal Planeswalkers that it can be a little confusing. This is one that this variant was in the Magic 30th Anniversary Countdown, so like their Advent Calendar set that they put from Secret Lair. So she starts with 4 loyalty. She's 2 white and 4 generic, and she's a Planeswalker, which is basically what the text is. And then for her +1 ability is you can create 3 soldiers. Each is a 1/1 white creature, which is great. So you're getting three white creature soldier tokens. You can -3 here, and all creatures in play with power 4 or greater are destroyed. This will, as long as you don't have anything really buffing your board, this will protect most of what you have in the deck, but that one's kind of situational because we do have a lot of ways to buff our board up. And then -7 for the rest of the game, creatures you control gain +2/+2 and flying. So it's basically an emblem. So pretty strong. Just the +1 is really nice. So if you can keep her stuck on the board for more than a couple turns, you're generating a bunch of additional soldiers, which is pretty good. And then we got Basri Ket out of M21, and he has 2 white and 1 generic. Also a Planeswalker, in case you couldn't tell, with 3 loyalty. His +1 is put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature, gains indestructible until end of turn. A little situational, but it is nice. It protects Muriel and allows her to swing into situations that you may not otherwise want to in order to keep her alive. So that's pretty handy. You can -2 her whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack this turn. Create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. So it's another way to generate a bunch more tokens for all your non-creature tokens on the board. And you can -6 him to get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token and put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. I have yet to get to the emblem, but it would be pretty nice because, I mean, honestly, at that point, the game's kind of usually moving to an end. Either you've been crushed because everyone has teamed up against you to put down the threat that you represent, or you've just gone above and beyond what they can handle and are overwhelming them. But it's still a nice utility card, and for 3 mana, it's definitely not that painful to cast. All right, then we have some cards that just kind of support our board state in general. So you got Grand Crescendo out of New Capenna Commander, 2 white for X, and you create X 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Again, not that optimal. You'd rather have them be soldiers, but bodies are good because we do have cards that like to play with our totals and types of tokens that we're generating. But the second part of this is really important because you could essentially just cast this for 2 white. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So this is kind of a nice heroic intervention for in our white color here. So because you don't have to create citizen creature tokens if you don't want to. So pretty strong. Lauren's Escape. This was another newer one out of the Brothers War. For 1 white, target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you scry 1. So nice little protection. Of course, the protection spell, Teferi's Protection. Don't leave home without it in any white deck. It's still fairly affordable after the Double Masters 2022 reprint. I mean, of the rares, it probably ticked back up closer to where it had been, faster than any of the other ones, but it's still a really strong card and is somewhat accessible at the moment. You got Make a Stand for a white and 2 generic. Creatures you control gain +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. So another nice heroic intervention with a little payoff there for the power of your creatures. Akroma's Will out of the original Commander Legends. This one's really strong, especially if you have Myrel on the board. For a white and 3 generic, you can choose 1, or if she's on there, then you would choose both. Creatures you control gain essentially a bunch of keywords. So the first one would be Flying, Vigilance, and Double Strike, and the second one would be Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors. So if she's on the board, you're giving all your creatures this, which is a way to end the game in most cases. And then Unbreakable Formation. So you got a white and 2 generic. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and then if you cast this during your main phase on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on each of those creatures and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So if you preemptively cast this before you swing in with them, again, it's a way to end the game, buff up your creatures, or it's just a way to really swing in hard, make your opponents have some tough decisions, and you really don't lose anything because your creatures are indestructible and they have vigilance. So you still get to keep them all up as blockers. All right, next stack here we have cards that are just generally good supportive cards for the deck. And I think most of these ones are actually some form of card draw. So first up, we got the Archivist of Ogma. This is out of Baldur's Gate, one of the good rares out of there. So a white and 1 generic, you get a Halfling Cleric with Flash, a 2/2. And whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So it's not as oppressive as like Hull Breacher or Opposition Agent is, but it's still a nice payoff for people searching their decks. And a lot of people do. You have tons of fetch lands, or like the actual fetch lands, or say like Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds or something like that, or actual tutors as well. So Commander as a format has a lot of deck searching, so you can potentially gain a lot of life and draw a lot of cards. Secret Rendezvous for 2 white and a generic. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. This is a nice little diplomatic card. You can hopefully get somebody to bite and want to draw the cards with you and let you get some form of protection or make some deal with them. And you have Cut a Deal out of Baldur's Gate for a white and 2 generic. Each opponent draws a card, then you draw a card for each opponent who drew a card this way. So in most cases, especially if you're playing this before anybody's been eliminated, you're probably going to be drawing 3 cards yourself because everyone else will draw 1. So again, a nice little group hug kind of card. Got Symmetry Matrix for 4 generic. Whenever a creature with power equal to its toughness enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay 1, and if you do, draw a card. This is an artifact also. So again, if you have a bunch of mana saved up, you could draw a bunch of cards when Muriel triggers, because it just cares about the ETB, not necessarily that you cast it. Then you got Idyllic Tutor. This one lets you, it's a sorcery that lets you tutor for an enchantment, and as you've seen, we have some fairly strong enchantments in this deck that can be a little situational, but generally, if you're searching for it, you probably have a plan in place, so it's a nice way to draw them out. I don't think I actually put Enlightened Tutor in here, because when I built the deck, I didn't have access to all the Dominaria remastered reprints, but I will probably end up adding one in at some point. And then Ascend from Avernus. For 3 white and X, return all creature and planeswalker cards with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then you exile Ascend from Avernus. This one's kind of breaking the color pie a little bit, so that's why it's a little bit more expensive, but it could be very strong. We do have some creatures that are, 3, 4, 5, but we also have a lot that are 1 and 2, so this could be a way to dump a bunch of our lower cost creatures back onto the battlefield, which is quite nice. Then we have our different forms of interaction. So we got some direct damage spells, Path of Exile, of course, Swords to Plowshares, because it's in our color, and these are great cards. We love to exile things. Got Generous Gift to destroy target permanent and give them an elephant. Disenchant lets you blow up an artifact or enchantment. Lay Down Arms. This one is out of the Brothers' War, and I think it's actually kind of pretty solid. I don't really see a lot of people talking about it, but in a monocolor deck, this is actually pretty good. So for 1 white, you exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control, and its controller gains 3 life. So it's another 1 mana exile spell. It does have the caveat that you need to have enough planes to equal its mana value, but that's probably going to be, you should always have at least some sort of option for it, unless all your opponents are playing like Eldrazi or something like that. And then we have a couple board wipes. So this one, if you've watched any of my other videos that have white in them, you know I am very, very high on Farewell. This is one of my favorite cards. I personally think one of the top, if not the top card to get printed in 2022. I love this card. I put it in every deck that I can. It is so strong and so versatile. So for 2 white and 4 generic, you choose 1 or more. You exile all artifacts, all creatures, all enchantments, and or all graveyards. Really, really strong. Lets you pinpoint what you want to remove with the minimal amount of pain to you and your deck. I love this card, and not to mention the artwork's really cool. Both this one and the showcase version, just awesome. Every time I get a copy, I squirrel it away because I can never have enough copies of this card. And then we got Ravnica at War, which is a white and 3 generic to exile all multicolored permanents. So again, a little situational, but you know it's not going to hurt any of your cards because you don't have any multicolored permanents in this deck. So a nice little one-sided board wipe. Okay, and then we get into the different ways that we can ramp or generate mana. So of course it's white. Why not put Smothering Tithe in here, especially with the reprint? So we got that in here. Smuggler's Share, this is one that came out of New Capenna Commander. This is actually, I think, probably the most expensive card out of New Capenna Commander. So it's a white and 2 generic for an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn. Then create a treasure token for each opponent who had 2 or more lands enter the battlefield under their control this turn. It's a little situational, but you are checking this at every end step. So if they're drawing cards on your turn, you're still getting this payoff. If each opponent is drawing cards. As long as, and it cares about each opponent as well. So it's not just if somebody did it, each opponent who does this. So if you're playing a highly interactive pod with like a bunch of blue players and everyone's drawing a bunch of cards, you can get a ton of treasure out of this. So for 3 mana, it has a lot of upside and not a ton of downside, but I could understand if you didn't necessarily want to put it in here because it's not like super on theme with the Soldier Tribal. It's just a good white card. Monologue Tax, this one came out of Commander 21, another one of the good cards out of there. For a white and 2 generic, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. So it's kind of like Smothering Tithe, or it's kind of a mix between like Rhystic Study and Smothering Tithe, because it cares about spells being cast, but you get treasure out of it. It only happens once each turn because it's only the second when they cast their second spell each turn. So it may not trigger every turn, but still pretty good, especially for white. It's nice. Then we got our usual mana rocks. So Commander Sphere, Thought Vessel, because we like to maximize our no hand size if possible, or no maximum hand size. Mind Stone, Arcane Signet, and Soul Ring. And then the last few cards are ramp, so like actual land ramp. This one's actually really, really strong. I highly undervalued this card until I started playing with it in this deck. And if you can get it out on turn early, like first turn or two, it is stupidly good. I will not miss a land drop generally when this card's out there. I will keep the 1 white available to use this, at least until I have more mana than I need. So for 1 white, you get a 1/1 human Nomad Cleric. Again, would be great if he was a soldier, but that's not really why we have him in here. And then you can pay a white and tap to search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Activate only if an opponent controls more lands than you. Obviously, if you go turn 1, or if you go first in your pod, this is going to be a whole lot less useful. If you're going in any other part of the turn order, then this card gets really good. And it's any land. It doesn't matter if it's a Plains, if it's a Cavern of Souls, whatever. You can go find it. So it's really strong. Highly recommend it. I don't think it's that expensive. I believe this was also, I think this was the buy a box or the bundle card from Double Masters 2022 in addition to being in the set itself. But really, really good. Gift of Estates for a white and 1 generic. If an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 Plains cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. Again, like as long as you're not going first, you probably will meet this criteria, and then you'll have lands in hand, so you don't miss any land drops, which is really nice, because that's not always the case. Here's one of the other really strong white cards to come out of Commander 21, Archaeomancer's Map. So for a white and 2 generic, you get an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for up to 2 basic Plains cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if they have more lands than you, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So again, I'm sure you've detected the theme. You ideally don't want to be going first, and I don't really advocate for it because it's not great for you, or you miss a land drop or 2. And then this becomes more useful. It is a nice catch-up tool, especially if you're getting later in the game and you're playing with somebody who has good ramp, like a green player or something like that. Having this out and then still playing lands will enable you to kind of catch up with them. And then finally, you get the Wayfarer's Bauble, which is just another way for us to ramp. So you pay 1 to cast it, it's an artifact, and then 2 to tap and sack it, and you can search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. Most of our ramp goes to our hand, so it's having the ability to ramp onto the battlefield itself is pretty nice. And then we have our land cards. So we don't have a ton of lands here. I think this deck is also usually monocolor. I keep about 28. We'll count at the end, but usually it's a lot lower than what I use in most of my multicolor decks. So Cavern of Souls, anytime you're running a tribal deck, this is almost, if you have the ability and can afford it, this is pretty much a must include. When it enters the battlefield, you pick a creature type. You can always tap it for 1 colorless, or you can add 1 mana of any color, spend it only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. This gets a little bit less necessary, I guess, with Muriel, because as long as she's out, they can't counter your creatures anyways, but we do have some flash creatures, so it's nice, and then it's good for when she's not out, or if she keeps getting killed or whatever. She, in my experience, she becomes a pretty high priority target. So that's obviously a good one. Rogue's Passage, because you want to be confident in attacking with Muriel. So but what I mean by that is you want to be able to attack with her every turn and not have a serious risk of her getting killed, because you want her on the battlefield. Because if she gets killed, then you have to wait another turn. You have to cast her, and then you have to wait another turn for the summoning sickness to wear off. So something like Rogue's Passage, where you can guarantee that she's not going to get blocked at least, is pretty strong. And we have a lot of good creatures in here. We have some that can get really big, based on the amount of tokens and stuff that we have out. So it's a good card in general. You got Iganjo, Seat of the Empire. This is one of the channel lands from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. It always, at a minimum, will tap for a white. So if you were to play it, you'll always get that. It also has the channel ability. So you're playing this from your hand, and it's an ability, not a casting cost. So you're not casting it. So it cuts down on the level of interaction that your opponents can have with it. They have to be able to counter target ability, activated ability, instead of counter target spell. So you discard it when you channel, and it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, and it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So it could be as cheap as 1 white, essentially, or the full amount for 3. But being able to deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creatures is nice utility. Then you get Reliquary Tower, which is, usually pretty solid in most decks. Just lets you have no maximum hand size, because we do have a little bit of card draw in here. Command Beacon. Some commanders, I don't care as much about this if they're cheap. Muriel's kind of on the cusp of not caring so much, because she is only 4. But when you have to recast her at 6, and then 8, and then 10, having the ability to sack this to put her into your hand and go back to that 4 cost to cast later in the game is pretty nice. Path of Ancestry. This, again, in a lot of tribal decks. Actually, I take that back. This one just cares about color. So it's a nice way to, it does care about creature type. So it enters tapped, and then you can add 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity, which in this case is white. And then whenever you use it to cast a creature that shares a type with your commander, then you can scry 1. So we have a lot of soldiers in the battlefield. We have some humans that are not necessarily soldiers also in the, not the battlefield, in our deck. So this is pretty strong. We should be able to scry quite a bit with this card on the battlefield. Myriad Landscape. This is the only fetch land I have, because I really don't care that much about pulling out planes. If I draw a fetch land that could have been a plane, then why not just have the plane in there instead? But the nice thing about this one is it lets you put 2 basic lands on the battlefield for 1, essentially. You do have to wait a couple turns for it to happen, but it is a way to have a little bit of delayed ramp. Secluded Steppe. It is a tapped land, or an enters tapped land that taps for white, but you can cycle it to draw a card, which card draw is usually pretty good in most colors, especially the ones that don't have as much of it. So you could just as easily have a plane in this card slot there. It's not like by any means essential to the deck. It's just kind of nice to have the utility. Temple of the False God, getting to add 2 colorless instead of 1 is usually decent. And then we have all of our basic planes. So total lands, count them up real quick. Yep, 28 lands. Okay. So I could definitely understand where you would feel uncomfortable with going that low. I think most people like to have at least 33 or more. I'm willing to be a little bit more of a risk taker with the monocolored decks, because especially the ones that have a lower mana curve, just because it's not as big of a deal. But you can definitely find yourself in a drought for land draw. So I wouldn't keep a hand that doesn't have at least probably 2 to 3 lands initially. Because most of your deck can work around that, but that's my personal preference. I'd rather take the risk and have more options than flood myself with a bunch of land in a monocolored deck. So yeah, that was Muriel, Shield of Argive. This, again, one of the top cards to come out of Brothers War in terms of price and also being a popular commander. So I highly recommend it. It is a lot of fun. Especially, you can do a lot more to optimize this deck to really either go heavier on the tokens or get more of the tribal payoffs. I just didn't have that many extras laying around because I already have built several tribal decks in the last year or so, and I just don't own a bunch of the different tribal payoff cards there. So like a lot of them went into my Merfolk deck, my Svelun deck. So just kind of the way it is. I could definitely tweak it. I fully acknowledge that. But with that said, as it stands, it's still pretty strong. I would not rate this at like a 9 or higher necessarily. It does have some pretty good cards in here. It can really hit like a truck. But it's probably going to take a little bit longer to evolve into that board state than some other decks. It doesn't really have a lot of easy ways to like vomit a board state onto the battlefield and threaten to kill everybody in a turn or two. You're probably going to take a couple rounds of combat of Muriel attacking, generating all those tokens, and then you using those tokens or buffing those tokens up to really like swing in for the win. But when she goes off, she goes off, especially when you start talking like getting Myriad involved and stuff like that. It is fun to watch and will make your opponents sweat. So I would probably rate her an 8.5 because she, in and of herself, she is a very strong commander. Any commander that can shut down all your opponents for periods of the game, in this case on our entire turn, is going to be really good. And then just the amount of value that she generates each combat step by essentially multiplying the amount of soldiers you have on the board is really good. And she's got a decent body. Like the 3/4 isn't, I mean, it's not like crazy good, but at the same time, it's gonna protect her from some things. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand on it. I really enjoyed this deck. It's a lot of fun. For a lot of my commander playing experience, I really shied away from the monocolor decks because I didn't think that they were going to be that fun or that good. But the more I've built and played with them, the more I've really actually probably enjoyed them more than a lot of multicolored decks, just because you get to really focus on the one color and kind of you don't have to really think that much about like, oh, what are the best cards in each color that I can put in there. You can think about what's the theme of this deck that I'm trying to do. Obviously, if you have them and you want to go that route, putting some of the better cards of the color is never wrong. But you don't have to do that for multiple colors. You can just, in this case, put in the Teferi's Protection, put in the Smothering Tithe, put in the Smuggler's. What was it called? The Smuggler's Share. You know, there's some at the Esper Sentinel. There's some cards that are just generally good, like iconic for each color. And obviously, if you're playing a monocolor deck, most of the time you're probably going to put those in if you have them available to you. And this is no different. But I just enjoyed having more options. And I, like I said, I feel more comfortable playing with less lands in a monocolor deck, which means I can put more other cards in there and really kind of evolve the feel and the theme of the deck even more. So yeah, hope everyone enjoyed that. I know this one's probably a little bit longer than my last couple ones have been, but it is a fun deck, and it's newer too, so kind of wanted to go over some of the newer cards in a little bit more detail than I might have otherwise. So if you liked what you saw, please throw some likes down there. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And then if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. We do this every Saturday. As long as I have commander decks, I'll continue to make these videos for Saturdays. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we do the box break / pack cracking videos of different sets and stuff like that. So usually, like I was saying, about three times a week, we're putting out videos or new content for everyone. So if you subscribe, then you get to see them when they pop up there. And again, we'd love to hear some comments. We really enjoyed the comments and interaction I've had with everyone for all the other commander decks. So throw them out there, and love to hear what your thoughts are. Until next time, thanks again.